Hi guys, welcome to my ever-evolving channel about everything guns and manufacturing and just whatever comes into my brain. So this is the Ruger LCP Max, and you've probably heard of it, you've probably seen pictures of it, you've probably seen videos of it. I've had it for a couple of years now, and I'm finally able to kind of give my opinion and kind of my assumptions as to how this gun came about and why I think it's revolutionary. So let's dive into it. So the Ruger LCP Max. The Ruger LCP Max is an interesting handgun, and it's got an interesting lineage. It is a locked breech 380 caliber pocket pistol that fires 380 from a 10 round magazine. That's a pretty high capacity for a pocket pistol. We're going to go into that in just a minute. But let's talk about how this gun functions and kind of a brief history of where the design came from. So this gun isn't like most 380 automatic pistols. It is a locked breech handgun. It actually has a recoil operated locked breech with a tilting barrel, similar to a full-size 9mm handgun. And you say, well, why would you do this on a 380 pistol? I thought 380 pistols could be blowback. But if you'll notice, when you press on the barrel and the front of the slide, they both reciprocate back slightly, about a quarter of an inch before the barrel really starts to dip down, and then the slide reciprocates all the way. And that's because 380 is kind of on the edge of pistols that have the ability to just be blowback only. You're still required to have a relatively heavy slide, and so making a pocket pistol version of a 380 can be a little challenging, especially if you want something that's very light. Well, enter George Kellgren. George Kellgren was a designer. I believe he is Swiss by nationality, and he was interested in designing a pocket pistol in 380, but he wanted it extremely small and extremely lightweight. Well, he figured that if he made it very small and he made the slide extremely light, that would be unsafe. It wouldn't stay locked up long enough for the bullet to exit the barrel without making the slide extremely heavy. So he said, well, hey, why don't I make it a locked breech like a larger pistol? What this allowed him to do was make a extremely small, extremely compact, extremely lightweight pistol that fired 380. Now, George is a genius. Unfortunately, his execution can be not as good sometimes. Let's just say that. Kel-Tec is one of those companies where they have a lot of good ideas, but their execution leaves something to be desired. So George came out with the 3AT, which was a single stack 380 locked breech pocket pistol. And it was a fairly decent pistol, and you had a pretty good chance of getting one that functioned correctly. I fluff and buffed several of them in my youth to make them run, and they did run reasonably well. But as with most good ideas, someone's probably going to copy it. Well, enter Ruger. So when the patent went up on George Kellgren's design, Ruger stepped up to the plate with their own 380 caliber pocket pistol that was basically an exact replica with a few minor details of the George Kellgren design. Well, there was one other thing that Ruger did to it, and that was make it reliable. I've shot a lot of the little Ruger P or the little Ruger LCPs, but I've never seen one malfunction unless it was extremely dirty or it was just not very well kept. Let's just call it that. So the LCP is a very reliable platform. They took an idea that was good and said, hey, we're going to mass produce it and make it reliable, which is great. Although it was good, it wasn't perfect. And I think what Ruger's done with the LCP Max is make it perfect. And there were a lot of things that kind of had to come together in order to do this. So First thing, the original had a 6-round magazine. So you'd have 6 in the magazine and 1 in the chamber. And it was, pretty decent pistol, but it had a horrendous trigger. And we'll go into that in a minute when I disassemble this, because it is a hammer-fired gun. So Ruger took that pistol that they made a couple years later and came out with the LCP-2. And the LCP-2 incorporated some changes to the trigger that made it much better. They actually put one of the main reasons why it had such a horrendous trigger was both the 3AT and the Ruger LCP was that they didn't want it to fire when the gun dropped. Because what happens is if you have a gun that drops like this and hits on the back, if the trigger's too light, the inertia from the gun falling and hitting will actually make the trigger pull by itself. And there are a couple of companies that have experienced this, SIG, that don't really, in my opinion, do a very good job of addressing it. Well, with Ruger, what Ruger did is they actually did basically what Glock does, and that's put an inertial safety on the trigger. So they were able to lighten up the trigger to where it was, not 12 or 13 pounds like the original, but about 5 to 6 pounds, but still safe. So that was the first thing they did that was really great. The other thing that they did that was great. The original LCP has terrible sights. You can barely see them. It's only slightly better than the old gutter sights on a Smith & Wesson pistol. So what Ruger did is on the LCP-2, is they made real sights and put them on there. And what I find interesting is with the LCP Max, they've taken that even to the next level. So a couple things happened to make it so that the Max could come about. One of the big things that came about was this magazine. This magazine is a double stack magazine, but you can see that the shot column is extremely narrow for a long period right here. This is most double stack magazines. The top of the magazine would be right about here. And that's because this shot column right here, it's hard to make this feed reliably without binding up. But Metgar, which is a great company in Italy, made a design that was reliable. I think they first came up with it for SIG, but it was something that they manufactured, and several companies have gone to them and said, hey, we really like this. Can we license it from you also? So the advantage of this is that you can take a gun that is made to have a single stack magazine, and then all you have to do is basically make the grip thicker, and that's it. And so you can take a gun that has a well-proven, easy to manufacture mechanism that the company's already used to making. You don't have to make it wider. You don't have to change where the trigger bar is. You don't have to change anything about it. All you have to do is open this guy up, and boom, I have a much higher capacity in a standard magazine. So that's really what enabled Ruger to do this. And, at the same time, probably someone else, because I don't really trust Ruger to actually come up with, have one guy at Ruger come up with all this stuff. Someone at Ruger thought, you know what? Well, we're making a higher capacity for the magazine, and we already have halfway decent sights. Let's go ahead and throw a tritium night sight on these standard and a U-notch rear that has this awesome little cocking lip on it. And let's put forward serrations on it. Let's basically do everything that someone would normally do, but just keep it that way out of the box. Get it that way out of the box. So that's great. 10 rounds of 380. And this is a pocket gun. This can easily slip in your pocket. As a matter of fact, it comes with a pocket holster. So I can shove this in my pocket and boom, I've got 11 rounds of 380 as fast as I can pull the trigger. So, and I've got decent sights. I've got a night sight, and I've got a proven pistol that runs. And I think this was extremely smart of them. So, and oh, by the way, someone else at Ruger probably, because again, I don't think one guy's coming up with this, said, hey, let's make it even longer. So they came up with a 12 round magazine. So now I have a 13 plus 1, or excuse me, I have a 12 plus 1 gun here. So I have 13 rounds of 380 literally again in my pocket. That's pretty impressive. And I know that other companies have come out with similar products, but I think that the track record of this specific design, starting way back with George Kellgren, gives this an advantage of reliability and ease of manufacture. And we're going to kind of go into that. So let's look at the Ruger and why I think the Ruger LCP Max is the best pocket pistol. Let's disassemble it, and we'll go over some manufacturing ideas that I have, and just how they get this thing to market. All right, Ruger LCP Max. So how to disassemble this thing is interesting. I mean, I don't think it's the best disassembly method. I think maybe I would have come up with something a little different, but I think for this gun, it works extremely well. So you have this pin right here, and this pin, it retains the this is basically what the barrel recoils off of, and keeps everything in place. So when you remove this pin, you can just slide the slide right off, and you can do that with a knife. Just dig down in there and pop that pin out. There's a little spring on the other side that kind of grabs it. Pull the pin out. Don't lose this pin, by the way. And then you can just slide the slide right off. And now you have this nicely made slide. And you have a recoil spring. And this recoil spring has dual springs, spring within a spring. It's not captured, but it is a steel guide rod for strength and stability. And the first time I ever shot one of these, I really was convinced that these two springs would bind up at some point. But I have put thousands of rounds through guns, either it was the 3AT or especially the Ruger LCP, and then the Ruger LCP Plus, and then the Ruger LCP and the Ruger LCP, excuse me, not Plus, Max. I actually haven't had any malfunctions with either of those. So again, spring doesn't bind, cheap and easy manufacture. And I'll just kind of go over what I think the costs are in something like this. You're probably looking at, if you make this in the United States, which, I mean, Ruger doesn't even have to do that. They could get a company in China to make these for probably a couple cents each. I mean, they just spin them out of a machine, several thousand of them a day. Wouldn't even really have to heat treat it. As far as the springs go, these are just kind of your typical springs, typical gun springs, relatively inexpensive. If Ruger's paying more than $2 or $3 for this whole assembly, I'd be shocked. So then we have barrel. And again, this is a pretty simply manufactured barrel. Barrels are usually the thing that costs the most, because by the time you get to the stage where you're cutting critical areas, you've already spent quite a bit of money making the rifling. So we'll talk about that in a minute. So here's your slide. And this is a very typical, steel slide. There's not a whole lot about it that's groundbreaking or anything. It's just a cheap piece of bar stock. And what I find interesting is the whole trigger mechanism. So all this slide really has to do is retain the barrel, retain the cartridge. So it's going to retain the cartridge in the breech face. Let me put it up for you so it's a little clearer. So there's your breech face. And then there's your firing pin. And then here's your firing pin retaining pin. That just goes all the way through. And then here's your extractor. You have a little coil spring under that. And then here's your extractor retaining pin, which goes all the way through. So this is an extremely easy piece to manufacture if you have modern equipment, especially if you have like a lathe with live tooling, probably, you know, the Morisiki's with a dual turret lathe with, yeah. I mean, this is pretty simple. The tolerances on this are not hard by any stretch of the imagination. For any basic machinist, and you can make hundreds of these every day out of a single machine, just feeding bar stock into it. And then it would go straight from that machine into a tumbler. You really don't have to do almost any hand finish on it. And then bead blast it. You know, in this case, they blew it. And then you've got your final assembly where they put the firing pin with the firing pin spring on it. And then the extractor and all that stuff. Because, I mean, if you really look at this, all that's happening is when the hammer hits this, it just presses the firing pin forward. There's a spring inside, and the spring, it has greater force than the weight of the inertial weight of the firing pin. So when you drop a firearm on its nose, if it does not have a firing pin block safety, like a Glock or the Colt Series 80 or something like that, then what happens is the firing pin's inertia will drive it forward. Well, to counteract that, instead of having a firing pin block safety, what Ruger did is they put a big old spring on it. And that's the same thing that George Kellgren did. He just stuck a big old spring on it. And the advantage there is that I don't have to have any other mechanical cuts to the slide. I don't have to have another machine coming in here boring another hole for some sort of firing pin block safety. But I still have a safe firearm to carry with around in the chamber. Let's talk about the barrel. Barrel, you're going to manufacture the rifling first, and then you're going to, machine the barrel. You machine it on a lathe, and again, you can do this on a lathe with live tooling. So you can basically come in there and you've got it clamped off, and you contour all this, cut everything down to the shoulder, and then you have another set of jaws that comes in and grabs this piece, and it parts it off, and then it's going to machine this whole thing out. And this is really where the critical area is, because I've already paid for the rifling, and that costs money. So it costs more than just a little piece of bar stock. A little piece of bar stock like this is, only a couple of bucks, if that. But when you add the rifling to it, that's where you're going to get your expense. And so if you mess up at this stage, it's going to cost you more. So you're going to have someone who's maybe a little more professional manufacturing this part of the gun, not just a button pusher. So there's my barrel, there's my slide. And for this total combined package, I'd be really shocked if they were paying more than about $40 to $50 for this whole setup right here. Now we've got the grip. The grip is, again, this is pretty easy. So you've got an injection molded piece right here, and then you've got this aluminum cassette. You've got this piece inside here which holds your entire fire control mechanism. You've got your trigger bar, you've got your reset, you've got your hammer right here. And this hammer is interesting because it is a pre-cock hammer. So the hammer is pre-cocked when the slide comes back. See, because when I pull the trigger and it comes forward, see, it goes way further forward. And so now the slide is going to actually cock it back. Well, gotta push that guy down. So try this again. The slide is going to push that hammer back. So now it's pre-cocked, but it's not cocked all the way. It still doesn't have quite enough force to make the firing pin hit the primer correctly. So it's got to be pulled back just a little more, and then it lets go. And there you go. You've got a hammer fired gun. Now with the inertial safety here, that means that when you drop it, the trigger can't go unless you press the inertial safety. So it makes this whole system very safe. The aluminum cassette in here that holds everything, very cheap. $10, $15 at most. And then you've got all the other parts in here are going to be stamped sheet metal except for the hammer. That's probably metal injection molded. The serial number is put on the aluminum right there. And what that means is that if you mess up on this, if you mess up on the grip, well, that's not actually the gun. You can just toss it. It's just a cheap piece of plastic. Again, a couple bucks for that, if that. So in this lower right here, you probably have less than $50, maybe $60 worth of machine time and assembly time. This is a cheap pistol to manufacture. Or I shouldn't say cheap. It's an inexpensive pistol to manufacture. I don't think this is cheap. This gun is pretty well made. It's not, I haven't seen anything about it that leads me to believe that it's cheap or not put together well. The other thing they did with the LCP2 was make it so that the magazine held the bolt open on the last round, which for a pocket pistol, I mean, that's kind of a dubious. I don't know how much utility that has. I mean, if you carry an extra magazine, maybe, but in a pocket pistol like this, especially with the amount of rounds it has, not really going for fast reloads on this one. You've got your magazine release, again, probably MIM. Your mainspring is back here in the back. All these pieces are very cheap. This is not a really expensive gun to manufacture. I keep saying cheap, but I really mean inexpensive. And so one of the things is, and this is kind of my speculation, is that the magazine actually probably costs them quite a bit. One of the reasons I think that is that the gun only comes with one. It comes with one magazine. So they're probably either making these or having Mekgar make these. I don't see any markings on it. It doesn't say made in Italy. There were some previous models of LCP that had magazines that said made in Italy on them. So either Mekgar is making them or Ruger is making them under license. I'm pretty sure that Mekgar still has the patent on this. And that's probably where some decent amount of cost is coming in, is the fact that they need to pay Mekgar in order to license this magazine, which in my opinion is well worth it, because again, all the internals in here are just like a regular LCP. Two, I didn't have to open this up because, I mean, if you look at this whole mechanism is made for a single stack gun. It's not made for a double stack gun. But the fact that this magazine has a very narrow shot column, all I have to do is open up the grip, and voila, I've got a really nice higher capacity gun. And I know it's not really high capacity, it's standard capacity, but you get sucked into all this terminology. I know it sucks. So let's go ahead and put this thing together, and I'll kind of give you my final thoughts on the gun. All right. So the Ruger LCP Max. My final thoughts on the Ruger LCP Max is in my opinion, this is the best pocket pistol that you can have. And I've been carrying it for a couple of years. On this particular gun, I've fired thousands of rounds through this. That's not hyperbole. I've fired thousands of rounds. You can see the discoloration on the barrel. This gun's been shot a lot. I've never had a malfunction. It hits where I aim it at. It's a great gun. I can fit it in my pocket. It's extremely lightweight. And even with my big hands, I can still get a good purchase on it. And actually, I think it's even better purchase with the fact that it is wider now. The original LCP, one of the things I didn't like about it is it was so narrow. So I actually like the fact that it's wider. And even people that have relatively small hands, my daughters love this gun, and they have very small hands. So again, this is a great little pistol. I actually like this gun so much, I got another one. So this one came out, I think, last year, and it's the 75th anniversary model. I really didn't care about that. What I cared about was this gun was just insanely cheap. Uh, this was about $100 cheaper than the other model, and it was, it's stainless steel. I don't really care about that. This is a pocket gun. I'm not going to be flashing it or anything. It's got this little, probably laser engraved 75th anniversary on it, and I've shot this probably a couple hundred times, and again, no issues. I believe it has an aluminum trigger. Oh. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Could be. I think it is. Yeah, that feels like aluminum. But the trigger really doesn't feel any different. They both feel the same. Yeah. They both kind of have that twangy sound to it, but you don't really notice that when you're shooting. I suspect that one of the ways Ruger was able to sell this for cheaper is that it was stainless steel, so they were able to machine it and then clean it up, buff it up, and they didn't have to blue it. They didn't have to do anything else to it. They could just kind of throw it on the line and get it out of there, and it cost them a little less. So they just passed that savings along. And I think both of these are fantastic as little pocket guns. There are some other guns in this category. The new Smith & Wesson Bodyguard is one of them. But again, that's something that hasn't been around very long. This particular design that's hammer fired and that's lock breech that George Kellgren originally came up with 30 plus years ago has been around for a long time, and it is very well established. And these things are pretty accurate. I mean, I can put every single shot in this gun in the size of a pie plate at about 10 yards. And that's pretty nice. Now, something I do recommend with these guns is that because they are snappy, these things are really lightweight. I really like some of the lighter bullets for this one. Some people don't like that, but I kind of like these bullets, these cavitating bullets. These are about 60 grains. They're extremely fast. They're over 1,000 feet per second, and they still have quite a bit of oomph. And they're not that expensive. They feed extremely well because they're not hollow points. Although I really haven't had a problem with hollow points in these, but just so you're aware, if you get one of these and you're firing, 90 to 100 grain bullets through it, it's definitely going to have a lot more recoil. It's going to be a lot more snappy. I like the faster, lighter bullets because, I mean, it's hard to miss with this thing when you put those in it. It's very light recoiling. So check out the Ruger LCP Max. And oh yeah, I was going to tell you, in my opinion, these guns probably don't cost Ruger more than about $150 to roughly around $200 to manufacture this thing soup to nuts. And so if they're selling it for just shy of $300, I've seen them go upwards of about $350. They're making money on these things. These are inexpensive to manufacture, but they really did get it all right between the sights, the trigger, the capacity, the size. I think you just can't find a better pocket pistol. And if you're a guy who's got if you're running outside to grab the mail and you got your sweats on and you can throw this in your sweats, or you're down on the beach, walking on the beach in your shorts, and you can toss this in your pocket, I think it's just a great option for pocket carry that still gives you a lot of capacity and a lot of capability. And that's my review of the LCP Max. Well, thanks for bearing with me, and I love to read your comments down in the comments. If you have any ideas about these or any comments about them. I don't really know what these are all manufactured from as far as like quality of steel or anything like that. This is obviously stainless steel, but I just, when I see a design like this that is simple and elegant and useful, that doesn't cost an arm and a leg, it just makes me happy. So I'll see you guys later. Bye.